Hi everyone, welcome to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood on Relax Radio. So in this segment, we're gonna talk about the battle for Brick Lane, or what's developing to be the arguments in the battle for Brick Lane around the controversial Truman Brewery application. And the current controversy is why is such a controversial application with, say, over 7,000 objections is being heard in an election campaign. So I'm going to go over to Andrew. Andrew, you actually wrote a letter questioning why it was being heard on the 27th of April. Do you just want to go through your letter and the background and the kind of response you've had to that?
So actually, I got a letter from some local campaigners who were worried about it being dealt with basically sort of a week before a major London election. We're planning, because the Mayor of London does have planning responsibilities. So they were concerned about the timing of it and wanted this planning meeting to be held after the 6th of May when the local elections are. So I forwarded it on to the planning team with my recommendations and made the comment that actually, if you look at social media in Tower Hamlets, the Brick Lane development, Spitalfields, those issues come up a lot. And therefore, this might not be the best time to have a planning meeting. But I never heard back from them. And then it actually is on the agenda next Tuesday night. A development committee is the planning application for one of the developments in Brick Lane.
So just to explain to the readers, we have something in British politics called a pre-election period, which is traditionally 3 weeks before an election, and the traditional word for it is purdah. And in that period, the governing party is supposed to be sensitive about what issues or what decisions it makes. And one of the reasons is so not to influence elections, but the other reason is not to bind their successor, just in case there's an election, the results, there's a change in the governing parties, they're not bound by these last minute decisions. This seems to meet both criteria. It is kind of it's very political decision, and it is within 3 weeks of an election. Any kind of, what do you think? Why have they put it? Because they moved it they moved the date to bring it forward, so they're like fast tracking it as well. It's just like, have they indicated what their reasoning is to you, Andrew, in any of the correspondence?
No, so they haven't sort of actually responded. I mean, the only thing that I can think of is when I look at the planning application, it was actually what is called validated on the 6th of May last year, so 2020. And normally there's a deadline to make planning decisions. And for a really major planning application, that's 16 weeks or 4 months. This is not that big a planning application. Yeah. So the actual deadline for the council to have made a decision probably was late summer of last year. And here we are many months on, not having made a decision. And what that does mean is that developer can basically go to somebody else to make that decision. So they could go to the Mayor of London, which we've seen happen before in Tower Hamlets, or they could go to the Secretary of State, which again we've also seen, Westbury Printworks, for example. So that may be one of the reasons, is that actually they're out of time. And we have this bad habit in Tower Hamlets of kind of not dealing with big planning applications in time and kind of taking our time over them. But that does leave us at risk of the developer to start deciding to play hardball with us and sort of going to somebody else. So that may be one reason. But because I haven't had any feedback back, I don't know what the other reasons might be, other than maybe they're very busy and got lots of planning applications and they want to get it out of the way. But potentially this is very political, because it's basically about the future of Brick Lane and the Spitalfields area and what that area is going to be.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of, the numbers are kind of gobsmacking, kind of over 7,000 letters of objection, that which is quite massive. I haven't come across any application in Tower Hamlets that's had that kind of number of objections, not in my experience anyway. So it just shows how wide how wide it is, of which out of that 700, they said they located the address within Tower Hamlets. And then 3,500, there were no addresses, but that leaves, say, just under 3,000, which are all over London, the rest of the country. So it just shows how big this issue is. But what I find kind of interesting is that it's kind of like it's dovetailed into livable streets as well, kind of ish. So the feelings are the same. It just feels like, hey, there's a community under attack. It just doesn't seem like the conversations have happened. People are not on board, and it seems like they told one thing, but something else is happening. And then livable streets happens. They see the same thing, and it's kind of like, like I was there last Sunday, and you could feel the actual tension, kind of ish. Just speaking to people, and it just seems like it's a crazy way to do things around here. But there is a potential of it sort of like spilling over into. I'm not saying we're gonna have sort of like riots or anything like that, but I'm just saying that the feeling is really there's anger there, and I just don't understand why we keep on doing the same thing, because but it's feeding in a sort of issue. So it's going to be a really interesting planning meeting, and whether the committee members will defer the decision. You've sat on planning committees, Andrew. Do you have you been on a decision where you deferred it, and how does that decision happen, kind of ish?
Yes, I mean, that's definitely within the remit of councillors, and it actually happened a few days ago at the Strategic Development Committee. There were some issues in question about a development, so they basically agreed to defer it until the next meeting to give the applicant and the council more time to sort out an answer on a particular issue. Yeah. And so it does happen, fairly often, or perhaps for a site visit. So I know one of the councillors also said she would like to do a site visit, and actually the site in question was actually to the north of this one in Brick Lane, so it wasn't that far away. And that's something they can decide on in the meeting itself to defer the decision until a subsequent meeting. But it helps if they have a decision or there's something specific about it. And this planning application is for office space on Brick Lane. So it's nothing, incredibly exciting or hugely important. It's actually not that big. So talking about a part 5-story office building and then a basement for plant. So it's not a huge development. So that, the risk of deferring it, I think, is pretty low.
Gotcha. Well, that'd be interesting to see whether the committee members do defer it, because I think given the controversy around the scheduling of it, it's a no-brainer. But let's see how it is. Do you want to run through how planning, because a lot of people might be watching that planning committee for the first time? Do you just want to run through how it works, Andrew, and what the committee members will be looking at, or what you're told as a committee member to look at in terms of the application?
Okay. So what will normally happen is about a week before the meeting, the planning officers will release a written report, and that report is then published online, and it then basically makes a recommendation as to whether or not to accept or to refuse this planning application. It then goes to a committee, and that meeting is public. There are limited speaking rights. So if you want to speak for or against, you have to register up, several days in advance, and basically you're then given permission. But so one of the problems with that is that normally only 2 residents are allowed to speak against, and maybe 1 or 2 councillors, and they're only allowed to speak for 3 minutes. And 3 minutes is not a lot of time to say what you need to say. But what normally happens nowadays is that the planning officers will give a presentation, like via PowerPoint, with some slides of explaining what it's all about. And then people objecting can speak, and then the applicant normally will then speak. And then there's kind of like a question and answer session with everybody who's kind of spoken, including officers. and then the councillors kind of talk, amongst themselves, but in public, about what they think, whether they're going to recommend it, whether they want to make changes. And then at the end of that process, there's then a vote as to whether or not to approve the planning application or to reject it. And if they reject it, they have to give reasons. But they can also add conditions as well. So actually, the planning committee has a lot of power if they choose to use it.
Gotcha. Well, it's going to be this Tuesday, at 5 o'clock. You can watch it live. I know there's some last minute sort of like lobbying. I know campaigners are going to be down in Brick Lane this weekend just to explain to people what is actually happening. Probably the applicant, Truman Brewery, might be sending their people down as well, or would be distributing leaflets. So if you want to go down there, go down this weekend. Have a look at the site. It's an open car park. You can walk in there and have a look for it yourself. But next Tuesday, log in. Watch it. But I think it'd be interesting to see how we resolve the main question: is this application hearing legal, in the sense that the election per and whether the committee members actually address it while they're hearing it. But we've come to the end of our segment here. After the break, we're going to discuss the problem of social housing in mixed development. So a mixed development is a development where you have private residents who actually own or privately renting with social housing tenants, and they're sharing the same infrastructure, and there's all sorts of issues that me and Andrew have come across. So join us after the break, where we're going to discuss mixed developments. Are they designed for social housing in Tower Hamlets?